The rain in Boston always felt colder, sharper, a relentless judgment seeping into the stone of the old buildings and into the marrow of my bones. But this Friday, the chill was different. It was the icy anticipation of an execution, a ceremonial and utterly predictable one. I was summoned to the Ashworth estate, a mausoleum they ironically dubbed the Vault. It wasn't a place of warmth or family, but a monument to a lineage I was never permitted to touch, only observed from the periphery. For 29 years I had been Elias Thorne, the footnote, the acquired property, the boy whose very existence was a tiny, persistent stain on the polished mahogany of the Ashworth name. My adoptive father, Sterling Ashworth, was the physical manifestation of old money fading into brittle dust. He was all starched collars, thin lips, and an air of perpetual disappointment that hung heavier than the scent of lemon polish and mothballs in their sprawling, decaying home. He was a man who spoke only in low, measured pronouncements, and the most frequent pronouncement was the silent one he delivered with his eyes. "You do not belong here." Then there was Eleanor, my adoptive mother. She was the conductor of the subtle cruelty, the maestro of the psychological barb. She never yelled. She simply corrected, refined, and minimized. "Elias, dear, your tie is slightly askew. A true Ashworth would have noticed." Or, "Elias, you're very good with dates and facts. A useful skill for an archivist, but remember, history is what we learn from, not what we are defined by." Her voice, a delicate silver chime, was the one that had broken me most thoroughly. Their biological daughter, Vivian, my sister, was the masterpiece. Flawless blonde hair, an effortless grace, and a curated life designed to validate their snobbery. She was 3 years older than me, and her role was to reinforce the hierarchy. When we were children, if I ever achieved a small success, a good grade, a compliment from a family friend, Vivian would casually mention it was sweet for someone with a more limited background. That was the genius of their torment. They never left marks, they only left echoes. I made my way through the rain to the vault. The wrought iron gate was a snarling black sculpture of family crests I was forbidden to use. I walked past the manicured, frigid gardens that mirrored Eleanor's soul. Inside, the house was silent, hushed by heavy velvet drapes and the suffocating presence of centuries of Ashworth ancestors staring down from oil paintings. I peeled off my damp, threadbare coat, the best one I owned, and stood on the polished marble floor of the great hall. I didn't dare shake the water from my hair. I knew the look I would receive. They were waiting in the drawing room, a chamber designed for maximum discomfort. Sterling was positioned by the cold fireplace, holding an empty brandy sniffer, his expression molded from granite. Eleanor sat bolt upright on a velvet chaise lounge, a picture of aristocratic patience, her hands folded over a single thick manila envelope resting on the coffee table. Vivian was beside her, not looking at me, but staring into the middle distance with a slight, theatrical smile, the smile of someone who already knows the final act of a mediocre play.
"Elias." Sterling's voice was a low rasp. "You are late. 5 minutes." I didn't offer an excuse. Excuses were weakness. "My apologies, Father." Apologies are noted, but punctuality is a courtesy, not a bargaining chip. He gestured to the only empty space in the room, a stiff, uncomfortable wooden chair positioned slightly behind and to the side of the chaise, ensuring I was physically below Eleanor and Vivian. I took my place. Eleanor cleared her throat, a sound like glass being rubbed together. "As you know, your father and I felt it was prudent to formalize our wishes. One must be prepared for all eventualities, however distant." She patted the manila envelope. "This is the last will and testament of Sterling and Eleanor Ashworth." I felt nothing. No hope, no fear, no anticipation,
only a grim, numb acceptance. What could they possibly leave me? My few personal possessions fit into 2 worn suitcases. Their contempt was already the only inheritance I had ever received. Sterling finally spoke, his voice carrying the full weight of the Ashworth legacy, or what was left of it. "We shall be brief, Elias. We believe in clarity, especially in matters of legal import." He reached for the envelope. "The Ashworth estate, the vault, the investment portfolios, the trust accounts, the collection of rare books, and the entirety of the Ashworth name as it stands is bequeathed in full and without encumbrance to our daughter Vivian Eleanor Ashworth." He paused. This was the moment for the barb, the carefully planned, perfectly delivered insult that had been rehearsed and polished. He turned his cold blue eyes directly to mine. "As for you, Elias, we have chosen to leave you nothing." Vivian finally looked at me. Her smile widened, not with malice, but with a bland, self-satisfied pity, the worst kind. I swallowed, the tightness in my throat almost unbearable. It wasn't the loss of the money. I had known I wouldn't receive a dime. It was the reason. It was always the reason. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes softening into a mask of cruel benevolence. "We considered leaving you a token, dear, perhaps a small annuity to assist with your archival studies, but Sterling and I agreed that it would only confuse the matter of lineage." Sterling nodded, formalizing the sentence. "The integrity of the Ashworth line must be preserved. We adopted you, Elias, out of a misguided sense of charity, to provide you with the structure and education your unfortunate beginnings could not offer. But adoption does not confer blood right, and this estate is a matter of blood." Eleanor picked up a small, heavy silver cigarette box from the table, an antique, intricately engraved with the Ashworth coat of arms. It was a beautiful, priceless piece, and I had always admired it. She held it up, rotating it so the silver caught the light. "We did, however, set aside a single item for you," she said, her voice dripping with false empathy. "A box, a very plain, unadorned box. It contains your original adoption papers. We thought you might require them for your records." She didn't hand it to me. She placed it back on the table with a theatrical clatter, a box of shame, a physical representation of my status as an outsider. "Vivian will inherit the silver," she concluded. "You will inherit the silence that follows a closed door. That is your final and sole contribution to the Ashworth story, Elias, the end of a charitable endeavor." The silence that followed was immense. It was the crushing weight of 29 years of rejection distilled into a single poisoned phrase. "Adopted people don't deserve anything from this family." The words echoed the sentiment of the original transcript, but twisted for their sophisticated psychological malice. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. That was what they wanted, a dramatic breakdown to validate their superiority. "I understand," I said, my voice steady, though my hands were shaking inside my pockets. "Vivian, congratulations." I turned to leave. "Wait, Elias," Vivian called out, her voice a saccharine, performative warmth. "I know this is difficult. Perhaps when I take over the foundation, I could offer you a small position, archiving our old tax records perhaps, something meaningful, but not too demanding." I paused at the door. I looked at the trio, the father, Sterling, looking relieved that the unpleasantness was over. The mother, Eleanor, already rearranging her cushions, her eyes calculating the next move, and the sister, Vivian, basking in her inherited light. "No, Vivian," I said, my voice low. "I think I've had enough of archiving the Ashworths' records." I walked out. I didn't take the plain brown box. It could rot on their heirloom coffee table for all I cared. I walked the streets of Beacon Hill aimlessly, the rain now a miserable freezing drizzle. The words played on an endless loop. "It is a matter of blood. You will inherit the silence." My mind, usually a precise library of historical data, was a chaotic mess. I was supposed to feel rage, but I felt something colder, a profound, devastating emptiness. They hadn't just disinherited me, they had surgically removed the last vestige of my worth, the last shred of the lie that I was their son. I was an aspiring historian, living in a cold, one-room apartment above a dilapidated bakery, working 3 part-time jobs and clinging to the hope that my meticulous research on obscure 17th century charters would one day buy me a life of dignity. Now, even that dignity felt like a delusion. 2 days passed in a fog of cheap coffee and self-pity. Monday morning came, gray and unforgiving. I was hunched over a medieval manuscript fragment at the university library, desperately trying to focus on the Latin text, when my old cracked phone buzzed on the desk, a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, probably another bill collector, but something made me answer. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse. "I am trying to reach an Elias Thorne," a voice said. It was smooth, rich, and possessed a quiet authority that commanded attention. The accent was faintly European, perhaps Swiss or Dutch. It was the kind of voice that spoke in the boardrooms of global finance or the hushed halls of exclusive private museums. I frowned. Sensitive transitions. That sounded like something out of a spy novel. "I'm afraid I don't follow. I'm a historian in Boston. I have no estates." A low, gentle chuckle came through the line. "On the contrary, Mr. Thorne, it is precisely because you are Elias Thorne, the son of Marcus and Seraphina Callan, that I am calling. There are matters of extraordinary urgency regarding a will, a considerable trust, and an artifact you need to see. You have, quite unexpectedly, become the sole beneficiary of an estate valued considerably higher than any you may have encountered." My hand tightened around the phone. My biological parents, the ones I knew nothing about, the ones who supposedly dropped me off at a crowded city orphanage and vanished. "The Callans," I whispered. They were alive. I was told they were untraceable. Who are they?"
"Marcus and Seraphina Callan," Finch repeated, his tone becoming graver. "They passed away 3 weeks ago in a sudden and regrettable incident overseas. Their assets are vast, tied to a private, highly discreet antique acquisition syndicate known as the Obsidian Charter. They have left everything to you, Elias, every single thing. I need you in my New York office tomorrow at 11 o'clock sharp. I will send a private transport for you tonight." I stared at the 17th century manuscript on the table, the old vellum suddenly blurring. An antique syndicate? The Obsidian Charter? This wasn't just a fortune. It was a mystery, a plot twist worthy of a Gothic novel. Just 2 days ago, I was declared worthless by my adoptive family, suitable only for archiving their old bills. Now, a man with a silk voice was offering me a private transport to New York to discuss a sudden, monumental inheritance from parents who dealt in shadows and secrets. "I don't need a private transport," I managed to say, the lie sounding pathetic even to my own ears. "I'll take the train. Just send me the address." Finch paused. "As you wish, Elias, but I urge you to reconsider. Your life, as you knew it, ended on Friday. The world you are stepping into is less ordinary. See you tomorrow." He hung up, leaving behind a silence that was the complete opposite of the one Eleanor had bestowed upon me. This silence was heavy with possibility, danger, and a bewildering, terrifying freedom. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I packed my 2 suitcases, staring at the small, peeling walls of my tiny apartment. The address Finch had texted me was in Tribeca, New York, a place where the air cost more than my entire year's salary. I imagined the Ashworths, Vivian now planning to refurbish the vault, Sterling finalizing his memoirs of impeccable mediocrity, and Eleanor polishing her silver. And I had a cold, delicious thought. They were still poor, still trapped in their rotting mansion with their paltry $2,000 savings. The train ride was agonizing. Every click of the rail seemed to be counting down to a moment of irreversible change. Was this a mistake? A scam? A convoluted joke orchestrated by Vivian to torment me further? My historical training, my lifelong habit of skepticism, screamed caution. But the crushing memory of Sterling's cold eyes and Eleanor's mocking pity drowned it all out. I had to know. Finch, Moreau, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek black skyscraper in Lower Manhattan. The office was all glass, steel, and a sweeping view of the harbor. The air was pressurized, clean, and entirely silent, the true sound of unlimited wealth. Arthur Finch was exactly as his voice suggested, impeccably tailored in a dark charcoal suit, his hair silver and slicked back, his eyes a sharp, intelligent gray that seemed to assess my entire history in a single glance. He was around 60, but radiated the energy of a man half his age. He didn't offer me coffee, only a glass of sparkling water. He didn't offer small talk, only the cold, hard facts. "Elias," he said, gesturing to the sprawling vista outside his window, "let's dispense with the pleasantries. Your biological parents, Marcus and Serafina Callan, were not just wealthy, they were architects of wealth. They did not run a construction company, they owned a network of shell companies that specialized in the highly secretive movement of assets, specifically pre-modern art and artifacts with, questionable provenances." He opened a leather-bound folio that looked more like a sacred text than a legal document. Their official valuation is approximately $400 million. I blinked. 400 million. Not 300, but 400. The numbers were surreal, meaningless. They were just auditory noise. It consists of liquid assets, gold bullion, equity stakes in private European banks, and 2 significant properties, a Manhattan penthouse and the primary estate in upstate New York, Blackwood Manor. He slid a photograph across the table. It wasn't a sleek, modern house like I expected. It was an old Gothic revival mansion, dark stone, towering chimneys, and windows that looked like shadowed eyes. It was both beautiful and deeply unsettling.
But the core of the estate is the Obsidian Charter itself. Finch continued, leaning forward, his voice dropping slightly, becoming conspiratorial. This is the syndicate I mentioned. It's not just an antique business, it's a centuries-old network dedicated to preserving or perhaps acquiring certain sensitive historical items. Your parents were at its apex. He paused, letting the information sink in. Why did they give me up? The question was raw, escaping before I could stop it. It was the only thing that truly mattered. Finch sighed, an act that seemed forced, professional. A complication, Elias. A dangerous complication. Marcus and Serafina were inducted into the charter young. They were on an assignment, a particularly high-stakes retrieval mission in Eastern Europe. They knew they were being watched, by whom they never confirmed.
When Seraphina discovered she was pregnant, they made a calculated choice to hand you over to a reputable adoption agency, remove all markers of your bloodline, and ensure your existence was buried in anonymity. They wanted you to be safe and forgettable. He produced a folded piece of ancient brittle vellum sealed with a red wax stamp. This, Elias, is not a letter. It is the Callan family vow. It was written the day they left you. They did not abandon you. They hid you. He pushed the vow toward me. The script was elegant, handwritten, describing their love, their pain, and their absolute promise to reclaim me when the danger had passed. To our son, the keeper of the unwritten history, we hide you not out of lack of love, but because the shadows we walk would claim your light. One day, the charter will be yours, and you will understand the price of the truth. Wait for the day the veil is lifted. Seraphina and Marcus. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them away fiercely. They had sought safety. They had sought to protect me from the shadows. While the Ashworths played their cruel games of social standing, the Callans had been fighting a battle I couldn't comprehend, only to die before they could finish their promise. They never stopped looking, Finch stated, confirming the narrative of the original plot, but deepening the reason. They hired numerous private security firms over the years. They finally located you 6 months ago using an obscure data cross-reference from your university records, a brilliant maneuver. They were about to make contact, to lift the veil, when their private jet suffered a catastrophic failure over the Aegean Sea. It was not an accident, Elias. It was a targeted act. The Obsidian Charter is in turmoil, and now you are the last living Callan. Everything they owned, everything they were, is yours, including the danger. The danger. That was the missing piece. The psychological thriller element had arrived. What kind of danger? I asked, my historian's curiosity overriding my fear. Your father, Marcus, secured a highly sensitive object before his death, a historical artifact that certain competing parties desire. It is believed to be hidden in Blackwood Manor. You, as the sole key, are now a target. The Obsidian Charter is a secret society, but one with powerful, ruthless enemies. You are no longer Elias Thorne, the harmless historian. You are Elias Callan, the unwitting heir to a kingdom of secrets and a host of unseen adversaries. Finch slid a sleek black titanium card across the table, a private vault key. This opens an account with $10 million. Use it for immediate security and logistics. Do not contact the Ashworths. Do not tell anyone. We move immediately to Blackwood Manor. You are now in the custody of Finch, Moreau and Associates. I picked up the card. It felt heavy, cold, and impossibly real. $10 million, $400 million in assets, a Gothic mansion, a secret society, and a targeted assassination that made my parents' death an act of war. The Ashworths' paltry $2,000 and the cruel silence they had bequeathed me seemed to shrink into an insignificant, childish insult. The Ashworths, I said, the name sounding foreign on my tongue. They need to know. Finch smiled, a razor-thin, cold expression. Of course they do, but we must be meticulous. They will be your first line of defense, unwittingly, of course. We need to lure them in, to see what they do when they sense the money. They are a known quantity, a perfect, predictable control group for your new life, Elias. And now that you are an Ashworth no longer, we use the Ashworths to our advantage. The next few days were a blur of legalities, security briefings, and a crash course in managing a massive, sprawling, secretive fortune. I signed papers that established my identity as Elias Callan, papers that transferred Blackwood Manor to my name, and papers that authorized the employment of a private security detail that would monitor me 24/7. Finch had been ruthless in his efficiency. I was moved to Blackwood Manor within 48 hours. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortress.
nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains, hidden from the main road by acres of dense, dark forest. When I stepped out of the armored black SUV, the air was crisp, scented with pine and damp earth. The manor loomed, a dark, imposing silhouette against the bruised twilight sky.
Inside, the house was a paradox. It was immaculate, clearly maintained by staff, but it felt frozen in time, like a stage set awaiting the actors who would never return. Dust sheets covered many of the heavy furniture pieces, but others we left bare. A large mahogany desk in the study, covered in maps and old coded ledgers. A grand piano in the music room, its lid open, a single sheet of unfamiliar handwritten music on the stand. In the master bedroom, the Callan's room, everything was exactly as they left it. A half-finished book on the bedside table, a faint scent of Seraphina's perfume in the air, a small, intricate silver locket, not Ashworth silver, but something older, more potent, resting on a velvet cloth. I spent my first night in that house, not in the plush guest suite, but in their study, surrounded by the maps and ledgers. I ran my hands over the mahogany desk, feeling the faint indentations left by Marcus's pen. This was my legacy, not the contempt of the Ashworths, but the secrets of the Callans, the shadows they had walked to keep me safe. The very next morning, before sunrise, Finch called. "It's time, Elias. We need to set the hook. We need to announce your existence to the world, and specifically to the Ashworths." "How?" I asked, looking out the massive window at the creeping dawn, feeling the chill of the manor seep into my bones. "We buy something," Finch replied. "Something utterly gratuitous, aggressively visible, and entirely beyond their comprehension. Something that signals not just wealth, but a seismic shift in power. You need to make a purchase that screams Callan and simultaneously whispers, 'Ashworths, you chose wrong.'" I smiled, the first genuine predatory smile I had felt in years. "I have an idea, Arthur. It will be public, it will be humiliatingly perfect, and it will be impossible for them to ignore." I walked over to the desk, pulled out the sleek black laptop Finch had provided, and navigated to a high-end international real estate auction site. I found the perfect target, a sprawling, opulent, aggressively modern penthouse overlooking Boston Common, a location Vivian had always boasted was the only place to live, a place she was now too poor to afford. But the price wasn't the point. The point was the one small, insignificant lot that was being auctioned off right before the penthouse, a rare first-edition volume of 17th century historical journals, complete with the original binding. A collector's item worth a small fortune, but a symbolic one for a struggling historian. I didn't bid on the book. I placed an immediate, non-negotiable buyout offer on the Boston penthouse, $20 million in cash, paid within 48 hours. Then, I instructed Finch to have a junior associate deliver a very specific letter to the Ashworths at the vault. The letter was simple, 3 sentences long, printed on the finest stationery bearing the Callan Foundation seal, a seal of a stylized intertwined serpent and a quill.
It read, "To the Ashworth family, I regret that I was unable to retrieve the small brown box you kindly set aside for me. However, please know that I have found my true lineage, and with it, a new residence. Should you require assistance in archiving any of your minor estate documents, please feel free to contact my new legal counsel, Elias Callan, formerly Thorne." The paper itself was an attack. The seal was a declaration of war. The news of the purchase hit the Boston Society columns like a thunderclap. The headline was everywhere. "Mystery Heir snaps up common penthouse for record sum." It was the first time my new name, Elias Callan, appeared in public. I knew the Ashworths would see it. They read those columns religiously. They would see the name, the city, the sheer unimaginable price tag, and the carefully crafted phrase, "Formerly Thorne." The very next day, the inevitable happened. My private security team alerted me to a breach of the perimeter at Blackwood Manor. Not a physical breach, not yet, but a persistent, frantic set of incoming calls, routed through a complex series of firewalls established by Finch's team.
They were all marked The Vault, Boston, Eleanor, Sterling, Vivian. They had taken the bait. The smell of $400 million, the terrifying reality of their footnote suddenly becoming the headline, was too much for their brittle, status-obsessed shells. They had been wrong. They had lost. And I was ready for them to beg. My security chief, a silent, imposing man named Silas, came into the study. "Mr. Callan, 3 missed calls in the last 2 minutes from the same blocked Boston number. Should I block the source?" I shook my head, my eyes still scanning the maps left by Marcus Callan. Maps of old European roads, marked with obscure symbols. "No, Silas. Put the next call through. I've been waiting 29 years for this conversation." The phone on the mahogany desk, a secure, encrypted line, rang, a sharp, intrusive sound in the profound silence of Blackwood Manor. I picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was high-pitched, strained, and stripped bare of its usual aristocratic pretense. It was Eleanor Ashworth. She sounded frantic, almost pleading. Elias, thank God. It's Mother. I saw the papers, darling. The common Boston piece. Is this true? What is happening? We need to talk. We need to understand." "Mother," I interrupted, letting the word hang in the air like a dropped guillotine blade. I used the word mother like an insult, a cold, surgical cut. There was a horrible, choking sound on the other end, a gasp that was pure, wounded vanity. "Elias, don't be like that. We were merely formalizing the legal truth, but you are still our boy. We raised you. We provided you with every opportunity. That house in Boston, and this Callan business. Who are these people? Are they good people? They must be for such a marvelous gesture. We must meet them. We must meet you." She was already spinning the narrative, trying to claim credit for the man I was now, trying to insert herself into the narrative of my new, magnificent life. "The Callans, Eleanor, were architects of a life I could never have imagined. And no, you will not meet them. They are dead. They died 3 weeks ago. Their fortune, their $400 million fortune, is entirely mine." The silence this time was truly satisfying. It wasn't the mocking silence of the drawing room. It was the absolute, crushing silence of realized catastrophe. Then came Sterling's low, gravelly voice, cutting across Eleanor's strangled breath. It was the voice of a man who realized he had tossed away the winning lottery ticket. "Elias, listen to me. 400 million. That is substantial. You'll need guidance, experts. You are an historian, not a financier. We, the Ashworths, we have connections. We understand the landscape of wealth. Let us help you manage this. It is only right. We are family after all." I leaned back in the Callan's leather chair, my eyes fixed on the coded ledgers on the desk. The irony was intoxicating. Sterling, the man who had denied me a $50 silver box, was now begging to handle my $400 million portfolio. "Family," I repeated, testing the word. Was that before or after the discussion about preserving the Ashworth bloodline, Sterling? "That was a legal formality," Sterling snapped, losing his composure for the first time in my memory. "That was a necessary protection. We didn't mean it to be hurtful, Elias, just pragmatic. But this is a game changer. Think of the opportunity for all of us. We can merge the Ashworth legacy with the Callan wealth. We can rebuild everything." "You mean," I countered, my voice hardening, "you can use the Callan wealth to pay off the debts you've secretly incurred trying to maintain the vault's facade. I know about the mortgages, Sterling. I know about the liens on the rare book collection. The vault is a tomb, not a treasury." Another, deeper silence. My security detail, courtesy of Finch, Moreau, and Associates, had done its homework. They had exposed the rotten core beneath the Ashworth polish. Then came Vivienne. Her voice was the most shocking. It wasn't pitying or superior. It was naked, raw hysteria, thinly veiled by forced tears. Elias, please, please, I am your sister. I was always your favorite. Remember when we were little and you would help me with my homework? We are close, you and I. I need this, Elias. I really do. My fiancé, he won't marry me if my trust fund is empty. The Ashworth name is all I have, and it's crumbling. You are my only hope. We were family. We were loyal. Her desperate plea was the final confirmation of their moral bankruptcy. They were not begging for reconciliation. They were begging for a handout, a lifeline from the very boy they had secretly destroyed. I stood up, walking toward the window, looking over the dark, whispering woods of Blackwood Manor. You misunderstand the nature of this inheritance, Vivienne, I said, my voice quiet, final. This is not a trust fund. It is not a charitable endeavor. It is a legacy of secrets, a kingdom built on risk, and a destiny that would consume your pathetic life in a single breath. I don't need your guidance, Sterling. I don't need your manufactured love, Eleanor. And I certainly do not need your desperation, Vivienne. I paused, letting the cold, hard reality of my new existence settle over them. You denied me two things on Friday, a small box of paper and the right to be called family. You claimed I was only deserving of the silence that followed a closed door. Well, the door is closed, Ashworths, and the silence is now yours. Enjoy your house, your $2,000, and your fragile, crumbling bloodline. You made your choice, and now you will live with the consequences. Wait, Elias, don't hang up, Eleanor shrieked. We need to see you. We need to explain. We need to talk about the funeral. Your real mother, she would want us to be there as a gesture of solidarity. We can fly down. You will do nothing, I cut her off. You will never set foot on Callan property. I am hanging up now. Consider this my final act of transparency. Goodbye, Ashworths.
I hung up the phone, a small, triumphant exhale escaping my lips. The coldness that had settled in my heart after the will reading was finally gone, replaced by a surge of clean, exhilarating power. It wasn't just revenge, it was a profound cosmic correction. But as I turned back to the desk, the maps, and the coded ledgers, I knew the real game was only just beginning. The Ashworths were a finished chapter, a necessary piece of stagecraft. The true challenge lay in the shadows of Blackwood Manor, in the secrets of the Obsidian Charter, and in the dangerous, unknown reason why my biological parents had been assassinated. I was Elias Callan now, the heir, the target, and the unwitting historian of a terrifying truth. My past was settled. My future was a lethal enigma. I spent the rest of the day in a relentless exploration of Blackwood Manor. It was a labyrinth of cold stone and historical significance, perfect for the historian I still was, despite the suit and the security detail. The library, a vaulted room filled with volumes that looked older than the Ashworths' entire collection, was my first target. My fingers ran over the spines. Not modern first editions, but 16th and 17th century texts on cryptology, heraldry, forgotten languages, and the lost histories of obscure European noble houses. This was no ordinary antique business. It was a vast, private archive of secrets. My exploration took me to the deepest, coldest part of the house, the sublevels, or what the floor plans labeled the climate-controlled repository. It was accessed not by a key, but by a retinal scanner hidden behind a false panel in the study's wall. I had scanned my eyes that morning, and the heavy steel door had hissed open, revealing a stairwell descending into the earth. The repository was a huge concrete bunker, meticulously organized, filled with floor-to-ceiling shelves of crates. But the shelves were not filled with art, they were filled with files, journals, microfiche, and sealed boxes marked with the same serpent and quill seal as the Callan stationery. It was the Obsidian Charter's main holding facility, a vast, physical record of their activities. I opened the first journal I saw. It was a thick, leather-bound volume, handwritten in a perfect, flowing script. The entry was dated 25 years ago. October 14th, retrieval of the Veridian Codex successful. The Venetian syndicate was sloppy, leaving a trail of loose ends. Marcus's expertise was invaluable. Serafina, however, is consumed by worry for the boy. Her insistence on the Thorne anonymity was wise, but the separation is a wound that may never heal. The danger is not yet past. I slammed the book shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was not a diary, it was a chronicle of international intrigue, espionage, and danger. My parents were not just collectors, they were operatives, and their antique acquisition syndicate was a cover for something far darker and more valuable. In the center of the repository was a large, polished granite pedestal covered by a heavy velvet cloth. It felt like the focal point of the entire fortress. I walked toward it, my breath clouding in the cold air. I hesitated for a long moment, my historian's instinct screaming that what was beneath that cloth was the true beginning of the story, and possibly the true end. Finally, I reached out and pulled the velvet cloth away. Resting on the pedestal was not a dazzling jewel or a magnificent sculpture. It was a simple, tarnished iron casket, small, rectangular, and utterly featureless save for a single circular indentation on the lid. It looked medieval, utilitarian, and heavy with age. There was nothing to suggest its value, but everything to suggest its importance.
Beneath the pedestal, an engraved silver plaque was set into the granite. The locus of the Charter, handled with extreme prejudice. This, I realized, must be the highly sensitive object Finch had mentioned, the artifact my father secured, the thing that cost my parents their lives. But how to open it? The indentation on the lid was too specific to be a simple keyhole. It was designed for a precise, unique counterkeys, a historical, physical lock. I stepped back, my eyes sweeping the room, looking for a clue, a message, anything Marcus Callan might have left for the son who shared his passion for forgotten things. On the wall above the pedestal, carved into the stone, was a single cryptic phrase, a historical reference that made my blood run cold. The key to the locus is kept by the one who chooses sacrifice over blood. A shiver went down my spine. The one who chooses sacrifice over blood. My mind immediately flashed back to the Ashworth drawing room, to Eleanor's mocking speech about blood right. They had chosen blood, their crumbling, meaningless lineage, over me, their son. They had sacrificed me for their vanity. The Callans, however, had chosen sacrifice, their own happiness, their lives together, to ensure my safety. They had chosen sacrifice over their own blood by removing me from the danger. The phrase was a direct, devastating contrast to the Ashworths' philosophy. It was a message tailor-made for the historian in me, a message that connected my two lives, drawing a sharp, moral line between my true parents and my tormentors. But what was the key? A key kept by the one? I returned to the study, my mind racing. I pulled out my new phone and called Arthur Finch. Arthur, I'm at Blackwood Manor. I've found the repository. I've found the artifact, a small iron casket, the locus. But it's locked. The clue says the key is kept by the one who chooses sacrifice over blood. What does that mean? Finch was silent for a moment, the sound of his sharp intake of breath barely audible. Elias,
You are a scholar of history. You understand symbolism. It means the Callens left the key with the person they trusted most implicitly, the one person who didn't prioritize lineage over a moral imperative. And I believe I know precisely who that is. Who? I demanded. Before Marcus and Serafina died, they made one final highly unusual deposit into their main safety deposit box in Geneva. It wasn't money or documents, it was a single, intricately carved wooden piece. They didn't tell me what it was for, but they gave me the name of the person who holds the right to access it, a woman who was not blood, but who was more loyal to them than anyone in the Charter. Her name is Juliet Vance. She was Serafina's personal assistant for 20 years. Finch continued, his voice now a low, urgent warning. Juliet Vance is in hiding. The Obsidian Charter is compromised. We need to find her before the opposing faction does, and I have reason to believe that the Ashworths, desperate for leverage, will now try to exploit anyone connected to you, even your estranged, manipulative, adoptive family. Your revenge, Elias, has just become a deadly distraction.
I looked down at the coded ledgers, then at the sealed iron casket, and finally out the window at the woods. No longer beautiful, but menacing. The game had just escalated from personal drama to high-stakes espionage. The Ashworths were no longer just a memory of abuse. They were a potential liability, a weakness I needed to neutralize immediately. The one who chooses sacrifice over blood. I now had the location of the key, and I knew the price of failure. My task was clear: find Juliet Vance, secure the key, open the locus, and survive the enemies of the Obsidian Charter, all while keeping my former family at bay, using their desperate greed as a shield and a distraction. It was time to become the man Marcus and Serafina Kaleng had died trying to create. The historian, the heir, the operative, the one who had inherited the silence and a world of secrets. I returned to the phone. Arthur, find Juliet Vance, now. And simultaneously, I need a contingency plan for the Ashworths. They will try to find me. They will try to leverage Vivian. I want them humiliated, cornered, and entirely neutralized. They are a distraction I cannot afford. Finch's voice was grim. Understood. We will start the process, but be advised, Elias, the shadows are closing in. Your new life is a cold, calculated move on a much larger chessboard. I hung up and walking over to the desk and opened one of the old coded ledgers. It was time to start learning the rules of the game my parents had played. The deadly game of the Obsidian Charter. I was no longer Elias Thorne, the archive clerk. I was Elias Kallen, the heir to the unwritten history. And the history, I was quickly realizing, was stained with blood. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. My face was no longer the pinched, anxious face of the boy from the vault. It was sharper, colder, and there was a flicker of something in my eyes. The cold, calculating light of a man who had finally found a purpose greater than his own pain. The first move, securing the past. The second, destroying the humiliation of the Ashworths, for good. The final move, surviving the Kallen legacy. The rain had stopped, but the silence that followed was heavier than any storm.
The phone call with the Ashworths had been a cold surgical victory, but it offered only momentary satisfaction. It was a distraction, a necessary act of psychological cleansing, but it was over. My focus immediately returned to the chilled, stone silence of the repository in Blackwood Manor, and the ominous iron casket resting on the granite pedestal. The key to the locus is kept by the one who chooses sacrifice over blood. The words were an academic puzzle, an historical cipher, and for an archivist like me, they were a call to arms. I was no longer interested in the fleeting, petty drama of Boston society. I was consumed by the shadowy legacy of the Obsidian Charter. Arthur Finch was already on it. He called me back later that day, his voice tight with professional tension. Juliet Vance has been located, Elias. She is currently maintaining a low profile in a secluded villa in the Italian Dolomites. Serafina set it up for her years ago, a designated safe house, a contingency plan for a sudden, unscheduled disappearance. She is not answering unsecured communication. We need to get to her, Arthur, before whoever killed my parents does. She holds the key, the physical, literal key, correct? We believe so. Marcus and Serafina were meticulous. The key they left with her is likely a unique carved wooden piece, something that functions as a lock tumbler for the casket. It won't be electronic. It will be historical, perhaps even symbolic. The symbolism is what worries me, I admitted, my eyes tracing the code in Marcus's ledger. The charter is not run by men, but history itself. Every move is a ritual. If the key is Juliet, what if the key is also a test? Finch paused, a rare, extended silence. Elias, you are thinking like your father. Marcus had a historian's mind, always seeking the secondary meaning. We will get you to the Dolomites immediately. We can stage a low-profile meeting, verify the key, and you can return with the artifact. My team is preparing the flight plan now. You leave tonight. The Ashworths, meanwhile, were predictably desperate. I had instructed Silas, my security chief, to monitor their activity in Boston, not to stop them, but to catalog their movements, their frantic flailing, a perverse source of entertainment, and a crucial control group for the danger I faced. Silas reported their initial shock had curdled into a feverish, disorganized panic. Eleanor was calling every lawyer in Boston, trying to find a loophole in the Callan will. Sterling was drinking heavily and making wild, desperate calls to his few remaining influential contacts, trying to slander the Callan fortune as new money, while simultaneously angling for a consultancy position with it. But Vivian Ashworth made the first truly dangerous move. Vivian Ashworth has approached your former landlady, Mrs. Henderson, at your old apartment building, Mr. Callan, Silas reported, his voice devoid of judgment. She offered the woman $5,000, money she clearly doesn't have, for any documentation you might have left behind, specifically any correspondence before you met with Mr. Finch.
I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Vivian wasn't just after the money. She was after the truth, the timeline. She wanted to prove I was already rich before the will reading, thereby undermining their cruelty. Or worse, she wanted proof of my biological parents' identity, so she could leverage my past against my present. Did Mrs. Henderson give her anything? I asked. No. She found the offer insulting, but she did mention a box, the plain brown box of adoption papers you left on the coffee table at the vault. I slammed my fist softly on the desk. Damn it. Finch, that box is a liability. It confirms the original name Elias Thorne, and it contains the only physical documents connecting me to the Ashworths. If Vivian or her father get their hands on it, they could use it for legal leverage, or worse, feed it to a journalist. We'll send a cleanup crew to retrieve it, but the vault is highly secured, Finch said. No, I decided quickly. I will retrieve it. It needs to look like a desperate, sentimental act by the disinherited son. It will throw them off the scent of my true intentions, and it will be one last, final confrontation on my terms. My flight to the Dolomites was scheduled for the following evening. I had a small window, less than 24 hours, to settle the Ashworth account. I boarded a chartered helicopter at Blackwood Manor the next morning, flying low over the Catskills and into the oppressive, familiar gray of Boston. I arrived at the Boston Common penthouse, my new, aggressively visible $20 million monument to my success, in the middle of the afternoon. The space was a pristine, empty shell of glass and polished steel, a sterile antithesis to the cold decay of the vault. I had Silas post a detail outside and ordered him to contact Sterling Ashworth directly. Tell Sterling that Elias will be in the city for exactly 1 hour to finalize the purchase of his new home, and that if he is not there in 30 minutes, Elias will sell the penthouse immediately and move his assets to Switzerland. Be specific, Silas.
Use the word Switzerland. The threat of losing the money, of my sudden disappearance, would be enough to break Sterling's composure entirely. 25 minutes later, the elevator doors hissed open. Sterling Ashworth stumbled out, looking utterly ruined. His suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes were bloodshot and desperate. He wasn't the granite statue of the drawing room anymore. He was a terrified, pathetic old man. "Elias, thank God! I knew you wouldn't leave without talking to me," he gasped, his eyes sweeping the apartment, calculating the value of the view alone. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, hands in my tailored Callan suit pockets, a suit that cost more than his entire wardrobe. I didn't invite him to sit. "I'm not here to talk, Sterling. I'm here for one thing. The brown box Eleanor left me on the table, the one containing my adoption papers. Where is it?" He vacillated, seeing the implacable certainty in my eyes. "It's in the study. Eleanor moved it. She was distressed, Elias. She meant to destroy it, to erase the memory of her charity, but she couldn't. It's in the desk, the central drawer, locked. She took the key to her private box at the bank." "And the bank?" "The First National, downtown, the safety deposit vault. She goes there every Thursday morning." I checked my watch. Thursday. Perfect. "Thank you, Sterling," I said, walking toward the door.
He rushed forward, a desperate, final plea. "Elias, wait! You can't just leave! Vivian is hysterical. She's threatened to sell all her inherited jewelry just to keep up appearances. I need 10 million, Elias. Just 10 million. A loan. I'll pay you back. I swear on the Ashworth name." I stopped at the elevator and turned to face him. I gave him the look he had given me 29 years, a look of absolute, profound dismissal. "The Ashworth name, Sterling. I wouldn't accept a debt secured by that. You taught me that my origins were worthless. I believe you. Now, your origins are worthless to me. Enjoy your silence." I stepped into the elevator, leaving him alone in the sterile expanse of my new penthouse, a ghost in a home he could never afford. That evening, I was back at Blackwood Manor, but the plane to the Dolomites was still hours away. I had instructed Finch's team to arrange a surgical, legal strike against Eleanor. I needed that box. I needed the Ashworths neutralized before I left the country. The next morning, Thursday, I had my security detail, Silas, and a legal team from Finch's New York office meet me at the First National Bank downtown Boston. The plan was simple. Eleanor would arrive for her scheduled weekly visit to her safety deposit box. My team would intercept her with a court order. We waited in an unmarked van across the street. At precisely 9:45 a.m., a black town car, rented, not owned, pulled up. Eleanor stepped out, impeccably dressed, her face a mask of strained nobility, carrying a small designer handbag that probably contained the key to the Ashworth desk. As she entered the bank lobby, two of Finch's lawyers, two young, ruthless professionals in bespoke suits, followed her. They caught her just before she reached the vault. I watched through the tinted window as Eleanor read the document they presented to her. Her face, usually so controlled, dissolved into a canvas of shock, rage, and confusion. The document was a writ of temporary attachment and inquiry filed by Finch, Moreau, and Associates on my behalf. The writ claimed that during my childhood, a valuable antique, a small silver locket of great sentimental value belonging to my biological mother, Seraphina Callan, had been misappropriated and placed into Eleanor Ashworth's personal safety deposit box, and requested immediate access to the box to ascertain its contents. It was a brilliant lie. It was a perfect, low-cost invasion. It used their own obsession with antiques against them, making them look like petty thieves attempting to conceal the smallest piece of a massive fortune. Eleanor was forced to comply. The lawyers, accompanied by a bank manager, went down to the vault. They didn't find the locket. It didn't exist, but they found the key to Sterling's study desk. They seized the key under the pretense of further investigation into the missing antique. The lawyers called me a few minutes later. "We have the key, Mr. Callan. Mrs. Ashworth is currently being questioned by the bank's legal team regarding the potential misappropriation of the Callan antique. She's hysterical. It's effective." I gave them the final instruction. Go to the vault. Retrieve the brown box from the study desk. Do not touch anything else. Leave no trace of the Callan presence except for the writ, which they will inevitably frame. I was at Lobede International Airport within the hour, boarding a Gulfstream G650 chartered by the Callan Foundation. As the plane climbed above the clouds, I received a final confirmation text from Finch. Box secured. Ashworths neutralized. Proceed to the Dolomites. I finally allowed myself to breathe. The Ashworth chapter was closed. They were now entangled in a legal skirmish over a non-existent silver locket. Their desperate attempt to salvage their pride turned against them. They were neutralized, distracted, and their petty cruelty had been repaid with surgical, calculated ruin.
The flight to Italy was long but productive. I spent the hours going through the digitized versions of my biological parents' journals. They confirmed my suspicions. The Obsidian Charter was not a syndicate. It was a covert network of historians, cryptographers, and operatives dedicated to preserving historical artifacts that the official world had either deemed too dangerous or too controversial. Artifacts that could rewrite entire chapters of history. Marcus and Serafina were the leaders, the keepers. Their assassination was a direct attack on the Charter's power structure. I pored over the Callan family vow, the piece of vellum Finch had given me, examining the elaborate wax seal, the intertwined serpent and quill. The key, I realized, was not just the physical wooden piece, it was the woman who held it, Juliet Vance. The key to the locus is kept by the one who chooses sacrifice over blood. I now understood the phrase with chilling clarity. Juliet Vance was not Serafina's sister or cousin. She was a loyal employee who had chosen the Callans and the Charter's mission over her own life and safety. She had sacrificed her anonymity and her future to ensure the key remained safe. I landed in northern Italy under a thick veil of fog, the air cold and damp. The Dolomite safe house was several hours' drive into the mountains, reachable only by a single, winding, treacherous road. When we arrived, the villa was a marvel of rustic seclusion, old stone, heavy timber, and thick windows overlooking a sheer drop into a deep valley. It was isolated, defensible, and utterly silent. Silas and his team secured the perimeter. I was alone when I approached the heavy oak door and knocked. The woman who opened it was slight, middle-aged, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a deep scar running along her left forearm. She looked weary, but instantly recognized me from the photographs Marcus and Serafina kept. "Elias," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "You have your father's eyes." I replied, "Juliet Vance, I'm here for the key and the truth." She nodded, leading me inside to a small, unassuming study. She closed the heavy curtains, plunged the room into a warm, safe darkness, and then turned to me. "The key is safe. They almost had me, Elias. The attack on your parents, it was orchestrated by a rival faction. They call themselves the Lineage." The Lineage? The name made me pause. It sounded so much like the twisted bloodline obsession of the Ashworths. The Lineage believes that artifacts of great historical significance should only be held by descendants of specific, pure bloodlines. The Callans and the Obsidian Charter believe that knowledge must be preserved by anyone capable of doing so, regardless of lineage. That's the entire war, Elias. Blood versus knowledge. She walked to a small, antique desk, pulled open a hidden compartment, and retrieved a small, carved wooden object. It was a single piece of dark, heavy wood, not a key, but a section of a circular carving, intricately detailed with Roman numerals and astronomical symbols.
It looked like a component of a much larger puzzle. "This is the key to the locus," she said, handing it to me. The wood felt warm, smooth with age, and impossibly vital in my hand. But it's not the only piece, Elias. The locus, the iron casket, contains a set of coordinates, a map, not the artifact itself. That map requires 3 keys to be fully decoded. My blood ran cold. 3 keys. My parents had only managed to secure 1. The other 2 keys, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Who has them?
Juliet looked at me, her eyes filled with regret and fear. The other 2 keys were distributed. One was entrusted to a charter operative known as the Shepherd. He has vanished since your parents' death. The other was held by Marcus's closest advisor, Simon Vane, who defected to the Lineage a week before the crash. The true scope of the Callan legacy and the danger slammed into me. I was not just an heir, I was the last hope in a war against a secret society that had already claimed my parents' lives. I had the key, but it was useless without the other 2, and one of the keys was held by the enemy. "Why did they put the key in your custody, Juliet?" I asked, holding the wooden piece. She smiled faintly, a sad, knowing look. "Because I am not family. I am the sacrifice. I sacrificed my life for them. They knew the Lineage would only look among the Callan blood, among the official members of the Charter. They chose the one person whose loyalty was proven by choice, not by blood." The phrase, "the one who chooses sacrifice over blood," was now a tribute to this brave, scarred woman. "I need to get the key to Blackwood Manor, Juliet. Then I need to find the Shepherd and neutralize Simon Vane." "And what about your other family, Elias?" she asked, a strange knowing look in her eyes. "The ones who betrayed you, the ones who prize blood above all else." I thought of the Ashworths, of Sterling's desperate plea for 10 million, of Eleanor's theatrical tears, of Vivian's hysterical demands. "The Ashworths are finished, Juliet," I said, the words solid, final. I used their own obsession with blood and lineage against them. They are currently mired in a lawsuit over a non-existent silver locket, their finances exposed, their pride destroyed. They are a neutralized threat. I have secured the one document, my adoption papers, that could have given them leverage. They are no longer a factor in my life. But even as I said the words, a cold, nagging doubt began to crawl into my mind. The Ashworths were predictable, but they were also utterly ruthless and obsessed with status. Had I truly neutralized them, or had I simply given them a new, more dangerous motive? Their financial ruin was now complete, their pride utterly decimated. What does a family with nothing left to lose become? I looked at the wooden key in my hand. Blood versus knowledge. The Ashworths were the embodiment of the worst kind of blood obsession. Was it possible that the two worlds, the sterile cruelty of the Ashworths and the deadly shadows of the Obsidian Charter, were about to collide? I dismissed the thought. I was a Callan now. I had a mission. The Ashworths were history, a closed, pathetic chapter. I must return to Blackwood, I told Juliet. I have secured the one thing they could use against me. I had the adoption papers, the brown box, secured in a safe at Blackwood Manor. It was a tangible end to the Thorne chapter of my life. I was Elias Callan, and my focus was on the locus. Little did I know, as I boarded the plane back to the Catskills, that the Ashworths' humiliation was only the beginning of their final, most desperate, and most dangerous act.
The wooden key in my hand was not merely a physical object. It was a fragment of my true self, a piece of the life I was meant to have. Returning to Blackwood Manor with Juliet Vance's key felt like crossing a historical boundary. The manor, once imposing and cold, now felt like a living entity, a monument to the dangerous, brilliant lives of Marcus and Seraphina. My first act was to take the key to the repository. Silas and his team secured the vault door. I descended alone, the air growing colder with every step, the silence of the concrete bunker heavy with anticipation. The iron casket, the locus, rested on the granite pedestal, exactly as I had left it. I placed the carved wooden piece into the circular indentation on the lid. It fit perfectly, clicking into place with a sound that echoed the closing of a lock on a much larger global secret. The casket didn't open. Instead, a complex mechanism whirred inside, and the iron top retracted, revealing a thick, tightly rolled scroll of parchment tied with a black silk ribbon. I carefully untied the ribbon and unrolled the scroll on the pedestal. It wasn't a map of a geographical location, but a star chart, a celestial map of the northern sky, marked with constellations, lines of declination, and a complex series of ancient runic symbols. At the bottom of the chart, a Q legend was written in Marcus Callan's elegant, precise hand. The locus holds the map. The map reveals the location of the artifact, but the artifact's coordinates are locked by the celestial triad. You require the other two keys. The key of the shepherd, loyalty, unlocks the right longitude. The key of vain, betrayal, unlocks the left latitude. The key of the vow, sacrifice, unlocks the axis of time. The runic symbols, I now realized, were not just decorative. They were coordinates, but they were encrypted by the three keys. The wooden key I held, the key of the vow, was indeed symbolic. It had unlocked the axis of time, providing the necessary temporal context to the star chart. But without the keys of loyalty and betrayal, the map remained a beautiful, useless piece of history. My immediate focus shifted to Simon Vane, the traitor, the man who had defected to the Lineage a week before the assassination. He held the key of betrayal. He was my new Ashworth, a problem that had to be resolved, but with fatal consequences. Finch, who was coordinating remotely from New York, confirmed my fears. Simon Vane is a master cryptographer, a brilliant, terrifying mind. He was Marcus's protege, the only person who understood the full depth of the Charter's network besides Seraphina. He has the second key, and he is a full agent of the Lineage. I asked him where he was, looking at the complexity of the star chart. This was no longer an academic exercise. It was a race against time, a battle for the most dangerous secrets in human history. He's in Venice, Elias, operating under a deep cover identity. He's attempting to penetrate a secondary Callan vault, believing the full artifact is hidden there. It's a desperate move, but typical of Vane's intellectual arrogance. We have a window of opportunity. He expects a diversion, but he doesn't expect a direct intellectual confrontation. I'll go to Venice, I decided. Vane understands history and codes. I understand archives and human nature. I am an historian. I can read a man's past actions to predict his future ones. I prepared for the trip, my mind wholly consumed by Vane and the Charter. I had almost forgotten the existence of the Ashworths, reduced them to a pathetic, embarrassing footnote. But the Lineage had not.
The call came through Silas's encrypted line, mere hours before my flight to Venice. Silas himself looked agitated, something I had never seen before. Mr. Calling, we have a problem, a major problem. It's the Ashworths. They didn't retreat. What are they doing? Are they trying to sue again? I asked, frustrated by the trivial distraction. Worse, sir. They have changed tactics. Their lawyer, a rather unsavory practitioner named Mr. Hemlock, filed a public-facing motion in the Boston probate court an hour ago. It's not about the money, sir. It's about competency. My blood ran cold. Competency? Yes, sir. They are claiming that the pressure of your recent life events, the trauma of your original abandonment, the psychological abuse you endured with them, the sudden shock of the $400 million, and your immediate aggressive public behavior have rendered you psychologically unfit to manage the Callan estate.
They are petitioning to have Vivian Ashworth named as the temporary conservator of the Callan Trust until you undergo a full psychological evaluation. The psychological dimension was the true masterstroke. They were leveraging the very abuse they had inflicted on me, the trauma of the adoption, the shock of the inheritance, as evidence of my instability. They were turning their original cruelty into their final, most lethal weapon. "My God," I whispered, staring at Silas. "They're using their own evil as legal precedent." "It gets worse, sir," Silas continued grimly. "They used the box, the brown box of adoption papers. They didn't need the key for the desk. They used a petty lock-picking kit to retrieve a duplicate set of documents they had created years ago. Those documents, along with their carefully crafted testimony about your unstable mood swings and irrational fixation on historical archives, are now public record, and the media is having a heyday. The headline, sir? Disinherited heir faces competency hearing. Adoptive family seeks conservatorship. The Ashworths hadn't been neutralized, they had simply been driven to a final, desperate, suicidal move. They had traded their dignity for a legal nuclear option. The Venice trip was dead. I couldn't leave the country. If I was deemed incompetent, the entire Callan legacy, the Charter, the Locus, the entire war against the Lineage would fall into the hands of the petty, status-obsessed Vivian Ashworth. I immediately called Finch. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with urgency. "I see the motion, Elias. It's brilliant. Psychologically devastating. They've framed every single act of revenge, the penthouse purchase, the cold phone call, the Lockett lawsuit, as evidence of a manic episode. The judge is likely to grant a temporary injunction to freeze assets and order the evaluation. They're using the system to punish you for their own failures. We need to counter it, Arthur, now. I am not crazy. I am an historian, and they are leveraging a crime against me. You need to prove your competency, Elias, not just to the court, but to the world. You need to show that your mind is rational, calculating, and above all, in control. And you need to do it without leaving the country. You need to pull Vane to you." Finch's plan was radical. It was a perfect blend of high finance, legal maneuvering, and psychological warfare. A true Callan move. "Elias, Vane is in Venice, searching for a false artifact in a decoy vault. He needs the real locus, the iron casket, to complete his mission for the Lineage. The Ashworth motion is a godsend for Vane and the Lineage. It will freeze the Callan assets, create a massive diversion, and give Vane time to move. So we use the Ashworths as the bait." I realized, a cold, terrible clarity settling over me. "Exactly," Finch confirmed. "We let the news of the Ashworth motion spread. We let Vane think he has time. But you, Elias, will perform an act of intellectual genius that proves your competency, lures Vane out of hiding, and uses the Ashworth's greed as the ultimate distraction."
I spent the next 48 hours in the library of Blackwood Manor, immersed in Marcus's coded ledgers and Seraphina's extensive archive on the Lineage. I was proving my competency to myself. I was studying my enemies, both the pathetic ones in Boston and the lethal ones in Venice. The Ashworths' legal maneuvering was a media circus. Vivian appeared on local television, tearfully claiming she was only trying to save her poor, sick brother from greedy foreign interests. The irony was suffocating. My countermove was swift, decisive, and entirely based on the history of the Obsidian Charter. Marcus Callan's ledgers confirmed that Vane's greatest flaw was his intellectual arrogance, his certainty that he could crack any code. Vane believed the artifact was in Venice. I needed him to believe it was in Boston. I instructed Finch to organize a simultaneous, globally televised press conference, not in New York, but at my new Boston penthouse, the very location where I had first confronted Sterling.
I also initiated the purchase of a small, symbolic property that would serve as the ultimate psychological counterstrike against the Ashworths. I found it in the municipal records, the small, decaying two-family house in Beacon Hill, adjacent to the vault, Sterling and Eleanor's private, crumbling sanctuary. It was owned by a frail, elderly neighbor who had been trying to sell for years but was blocked by Ashworth's legal threats. They didn't want the wrong sort of people moving in next door. I purchased the house for 3 times its value immediately. The closing was expedited. The morning of the press conference, the media was focused on the vault. The Ashworths were still playing the sympathetic, worried family. I stood on the glass balcony of my penthouse, the entire Boston skyline, including the distant, pathetic roof of the vault, at my feet. The cameras were rolling. Finch was by my side, calm and implacable. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice clear and controlled, silencing the cacophony of questions about my mental state. "I am Elias Callan. I am not only the sole heir to the Callan estate, but the new keeper of the Obsidian Charter. I have been accused of being psychologically unstable by a family I once knew, the Ashworths. Their desperate accusations are based on a singular premise: that I am incapable of rational, measured, and calculated action." I paused for effect, letting the camera lights glare into my eyes. "I am here to prove them catastrophically wrong." I then launched into a 10-minute lecture on the esoteric history of the Callan estate, using terms like the celestial triad, the locus, and the key of the vow. I spoke with the academic precision of an historian, the cold logic of a strategist, and the absolute authority of a man worth $400 million. The Ashworths claim I am irrational, a person who is irrationally fixated on historical archives. If that is the case, why then would I choose to secure an artifact that could rewrite history? An artifact that has been hidden for centuries, sought by a desperate ideological organization known as the Lineage. I looked straight into the lens, directly at Simon Vane, wherever he was watching. "I am here to make a public statement to the Lineage. You are searching in Venice. You are wrong. I have the locus, and as of this moment, I have secured the final resting place of the ancient object it contains." I gestured to Finch. "Arthur?"
Finch stepped forward and made the announcement that broke the Ashworth family entirely, while simultaneously baiting Vane. Due to a temporary legal injunction sought by the Ashworth family, Mr. Callan is unable to leave the jurisdiction of the Boston Probate Court until his competency hearing. Therefore, Mr. Callan has made an immediate, non-negotiable decision regarding the locus. He has ordered the shipment of the ancient iron casket, the locus, to a location he deems the most secure in the entire city. A location that has, for 29 years, been the most profound symbol of Elias Callan's pain and rejection. He pointed his finger across the skyline, not toward the penthouse, but toward the distant, decaying majesty of the vault. Mr. Callan has just purchased the property immediately adjacent to the vault on Ashworth land, and he is converting that property, right now, into a private, temporary museum where the locus will be placed on public display for the duration of this legal struggle. It will be secured, guarded by the best private security money can buy, and its presence will be a constant, visible reminder to the Ashworths of what they forfeited. The finality of the statement was a tactical nuclear strike. I wasn't just taking their money, I was invading their sanctuary, using their own neighborhood as a museum of their failure, and turning their deepest secret, my disinheritance, into a highly publicized literal exhibit. But the true target was Vane. The Lineage believed the artifact was hidden. Now they were told it was exposed, publicly visible, secured in a private museum next door to the family that was trying to discredit the current keeper. Vane, with his intellectual arrogance, would see the move not as a trap, but as a challenge to his superior intellect,
a sign of my incompetence in keeping a secret. He would have to come to Boston. The result was immediate chaos. The media was whipped into a frenzy. The Ashworths were in full meltdown. Silas reported back from the vault. "They are screaming, sir. Mrs. Ashworth is throwing furniture. Mr. Ashworth is threatening the construction crew you sent to the adjacent house. He claims you are violating zoning laws. Tell the construction crew to work faster. I want a full, 2-story opaque black wall erected on the Ashworths' property line. I want it done by morning. A wall that screams exclusion." The wall was the final, devastating psychological blow. It was the physical manifestation of the silence they had bequeathed me. I was cutting them off, visually and physically, from their own home. The judge, seeing my calculated, cold-blooded display of competence, immediately issued a temporary stay on the conservatorship hearing. My calculated public move had worked, but the real work was just beginning. The locus was now in the heavily secured adjacent house, guarded 24/7. Vane was coming. The trap was set. I stood on the balcony that night, looking out at the glittering lights of Boston and at the small, dark silhouette of the vault, now partially obscured by the newly constructed black wall. The Ashworths were my bait, my shield, and my most satisfying personal victory. Then a thought struck me, a cold, sickening realization that made my blood run cold. The locus was on display, heavily guarded. Vane, a genius cryptographer, would never attempt a direct break-in. He would attempt something cleverer, something that would leverage the existing chaos. I immediately called Silas. "Silas, I need you to check the property adjacent to the vault, the one with the locus, specifically the basement." "Why the basement, Mr. Callan?" "The Ashworths. They've been there for 29 years. They prize blood and lineage. They wouldn't sell the adjacent property because they had to maintain the integrity of their own land. A simple Boston brownstone from the 1880s. What do old Boston brownstones always have?" I didn't wait for his answer. "Tunnels, Silas. They have interconnected basements and tunnels, secret passages for the old money to move around the neighborhood discreetly. The Ashworths wouldn't have let that adjacent property go because they needed to control the access point to their own home. They didn't want the wrong kind of people finding their hidden entrance." Silas's voice was tight with alarm. "On it, Mr. Callan. I'll send a team to the adjacent property immediately." 5 minutes later, Silas called back. "Mr. Callan, you were right. We found it. A hidden passage, bricked over but easily accessible, leading directly from the basement of the adjacent house to the sublevel of the vault. A servant's tunnel, perhaps. It's exactly the kind of intellectual arrogance Vane would anticipate. He wouldn't break in, he would leverage the vulnerability of the Ashworths' own hidden architecture." The Ashworths, their petty obsession with lineage, with keeping secrets, with their private crumbling sanctuary, had not only exposed me to Vane, but it also provided him with the perfect secret access point. They had unintentionally laid the groundwork for a breach of the locus. My heart hammered against my ribs. The locus, the key of betrayal, and the ultimate unintended consequence of my revenge. The Ashworths had done more than just create a legal distraction, they had created a physical trap. I had to get to the vault. Not to humiliate them, but to use them. I had to use their desperate need for money, their frantic self-serving paranoia to bait Vane into the tunnel. The only way to win this was to become as ruthless and tactical as my parents, and to sacrifice the Ashworths as the ultimate piece on the board. The true intellectual challenge was now set. I was no longer fighting for $400 million. I was fighting for my life, a key, and the preservation of history itself. The black wall stood between the Ashworths' home, the vault, and my newly acquired, heavily guarded museum. It was a 10-foot-high symbol of rejection, but it was also a vital piece of my emerging strategy. The Ashworths had provided the perfect theatrical stage for my public humiliation, and now they would provide the architectural weakness for Vane's infiltration. My mind was no longer Elias Thorne's, the archival clerk. It was Elias Callan's, the strategist and heir. The psychological trauma they had inflicted on me had been repurposed. Their calculated cruelty had taught me to read human behavior as a code, and their predictable arrogance was now my greatest asset. I was back in the Boston penthouse, coordinating with Finch and Silas. The locus, the iron casket, was placed in the center of the adjacent brownstone's living room, secured to a granite slab under multiple layers of laser grids and armed security guards. It was a visual masterpiece of overprotection, designed to lure Vane into the logical but unseen weakness: the basement tunnel. Silas, Vane is a genius, but he is predictable, I explained, hunched over a blueprint of the 2 properties that Finch's team had quickly excavated. He will monitor the security, confirm the locus is in the house, and he will realize that the only way to bypass the visible layers is through the Ashworths' architectural vanity, the old servant tunnel. He will leverage their ruin. But how will he access the vault, sir? The Ashworths are hysterical, but they are still hostile. They won't let a stranger in. I smiled, a genuinely cold Callan's smile. He won't need to. Vane is not just a traitor, he is a master of manipulation. He will use the one thing the Ashworths cannot resist, the promise of reinstatement. I instructed Finch to leak a carefully crafted false piece of information into the financial underworld, a piece of gossip that would inevitably reach Vane's ears. The information was this: the Ashworths, due to the new competency hearing, are preparing to sue Elias Callan for a portion of the estate, claiming their parental guidance entitles them to a 10% consultancy fee. They are seeking a strategic partner to help them finance the legal battle and gain access to the locus, which they believe contains vital financial information. Vane, the strategist, would read this perfectly. He would see the Ashworths as the desperate, self-serving fools they were, and he would see a golden opportunity. He would approach them not as an agent of the Lineage, but as a wealthy, sympathetic investor willing to help them crush their unstable, adopted son. I sent a final, crucial order to Silas. Do not place any guards in the tunnel, only sensors. I want Vane to believe the tunnel is his secret advantage. Instead, place all available security resources in the Ashworths' basement. Vane arrived in Boston 48 hours later. He did not arrive in a private jet or a limo. He arrived with the discreet, understated anonymity of a highly effective killer, checking in to a mediocre hotel downtown. Silas tracked his movements. He spent the first day watching the public spectacle outside the museum, confirming the locus was inside. The next day, Vane made his move. He approached the vault. I was watching from the penthouse via a live feed from one of Silas's hidden long-range cameras. Vane was impeccable, a handsome 50-year-old man in a tailored gray suit, carrying a modest briefcase. He looked like an investment banker, which was exactly the persona he needed. He didn't ring the main door. He walked around to the back gate, which led to the private entrance where the Ashworths received deliveries, a gate where their social facade was temporarily dropped. Vivian opened the gate. She looked haggard, her beautiful face strained by panic and sleepless nights. The black wall I had erected was the backdrop to her misery. Vane, the master manipulator, began his performance. He didn't introduce himself. He simply gave her a carefully rehearsed line, one that played directly to the Ashworths' fatal flaw, their obsession with lineage and status. Miss Ashworth, Vane said, his voice quiet, sincere, and filled with concern. My name is Simon. I am a private investment manager in Geneva. I have followed your family's plight in the media. It is a genuine tragedy to see a noble lineage such as yours systematically dismantled by what appears to be a case of severe, unmanaged familial discord. Vivian, hungry for any validation of her nobility, immediately fell for it. She brought him inside. The meeting in the Ashworth drawing room, the scene of my own execution, was surreal to watch. Vane sat exactly where I had sat,
the outsider, and yet he was immediately granted the respect I was always denied. Sterling, Eleanor, and Vivian pleaded their case: the betrayal, the humiliation, the incompetence of their adoptive son. Vane listened patiently, nodding in all the right places, expressing sympathy for their unjust suffering. "I understand your position completely," Vane finally said, leaning forward. The sheer audacity of his actions, the grand spectacle, the grand purchases, the sudden theatrical change of identity, it all points to a profound psychological break. This Elias Callan is not stable. He is a threat to the global financial markets and, more importantly, to the sanctity of Lineage. He used the word lineage. It was a psychological masterstroke. He was confirming their entire life's philosophy. "But I can help you," Vane continued. "I represent an organization that values history, stability, and the preservation of noble lines. We are willing to fund your legal battle, not for a mere 10% fee, but for a simple, non-financial contribution. We need the one thing your son has, the locus." Sterling's eyes narrowed, the greed immediately overriding his fear. "The iron box? Why? It's just an old, tarnished thing. It's worthless." "To you, perhaps, it is worthless," Vane conceded with a slight smile. "But to my organization, it is a historical key. It contains a map to a vast, undocumented treasury of ancient assets that predates the Callan fortune entirely. Assets that should belong to a recognized, established bloodline. Assets that will restore the Ashworth name to its former glory, and then some." Vane offered them a price that was both specific and utterly irresistible to their financial desperation. $50 million in liquid assets transferred immediately to an offshore account simply for assisting him in securing the locus. $50 million. It was more money than the Ashworths had ever seen. The temptation was too great. Sterling swallowed hard. "How do we help you, Mr. Simon?" "Simple," Vane replied, his eyes gleaming. "You know the house next door better than anyone. There are whispers, old rumors, of a subterranean connection between your two properties, a servant's tunnel, an old utility access point. I believe you have the key, or the knowledge, of how to access it from your basement. You grant me access through your home, and the $50 million is instantly yours." Eleanor and Sterling exchanged a quick, avaricious glance. Vivian, the heir, was already nodding furiously. Their moral compass, already shattered, was now completely overridden by the promise of an inflated, restored bloodline. They were selling the key of betrayal. "The tunnel is in the laundry room, behind a false wall," Sterling admitted, his voice hoarse with shame and excitement. "We bricked it up 30 years ago, but we know the brick pattern." Vane stood up. "Excellent. I will return tonight at midnight. You will have the wall partially dismantled, and the $50 million will be wired as soon as I am in the tunnel. I suggest you dress warmly. The tunnel is damp." As Vane left, the Ashworths were in a frenzy of avarice, already planning how to spend the $50 million. They had just committed the ultimate act of betrayal against the boy they had rejected, an act of betrayal entirely motivated by the promise of an inflated, restored bloodline.
Midnight, the hour of the serpent. I was in the vault's basement, hidden behind a stack of moth-eaten antique crates, watching the tunnel entrance. Silas and his 3 best operatives were in the adjoining rooms, ready, silent, and armed. The Ashworths, Sterling, Eleanor, and Vivienne, were a pitiful sight. They were crouched by the exposed, crumbling brickwork in their dusty, damp basement laundry room. Sterling was clumsily prying loose bricks with a rusty chisel, his hands shaking with nervous energy. Eleanor was shivering in an old fur coat, clutching a cell phone, ready to confirm the wire transfer. Vivienne was holding a flashlight, her eyes darting between the hole in the wall and her father's slow progress. They had done exactly what I needed them to do. They had opened the trap door. At 12:08 a.m., the brickwork finally gave way. A large hole, smelling of damp earth and decay, was revealed. A cold draft flowed into the Ashworths' basement. "It's open," Sterling whispered, triumph mixed with fear. A shadow appeared in the hole. Simon Vane emerged, his tailored suit now smudged with dirt, but his eyes radiating the cold arrogance of a genius on the verge of victory. He looked at the Ashworths, and his face was utterly devoid of the sympathy he had faked earlier. "The transfer has been initiated," Vane said, his voice a low, chilling command. "Check your account, Eleanor. Now." Eleanor fumbled with her phone, her fingers shaking as she navigated to her offshore banking application. A moment later, a low, choked gasp escaped her lips. "It's there! 50 million! Oh God, Sterling, it's there!" Vane nodded, a cruel, satisfied smirk on his lips. "Excellent. Now stand aside. Your part is finished. Your lineage is restored. Now I claim the locus." He slipped into the tunnel, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, heading for the adjacent property, the museum, the locus, and the trap I had set. As soon as Vane's footsteps disappeared into the tunnel, I stood up from behind the crates, stepping into the light. "The transfer will reverse in 30 seconds, Eleanor," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and terrifyingly calm. It was a digital promise secured by an antique security protocol. It was never intended to be real. The Ashworths froze, turning to look at me. Their faces, caked in dust, illuminated by Vivian's unsteady flashlight, were masks of horror. The sight of me standing in their own basement, a place I was never allowed to enter, was a greater shock than the loss of the money. "Elias!" Eleanor shrieked. "You're maniac! You're not supposed to be here!" "On the contrary, Mother," I used the title one last time as a deliberate insult. "This is the one place I have always belonged, at the bottom of your deception. You betrayed the man who saved you, Sterling. You sold your soul for a lie. You are not a noble lineage, you are common traitors." Sterling lunged at me, his eyes wild. "The money! You took the money! I'll kill you, you unstable!" "Silence, Sterling," I commanded, my voice cutting through his panic. I didn't need to fight him. Silas appeared from the shadows, his massive figure blocking the exit, while his two operatives moved swiftly and silently, pinning the Ashworths to the wall. "You, Ashworths, are now an asset," I announced, walking to the tunnel entrance, where Vane was now deep inside. "You are the perfect bait. You lured the man who killed my parents into a closed system. You are accessories to a plot that spans centuries, and the final chapter of the Ashworth saga will be written in this tunnel." I looked at the gaping hole, the tunnel of betrayal. I didn't need the key of betrayal from Vane, I needed Vane himself. I pulled out my phone and activated the communication system to Silas's earpiece. "Silas, close the tunnel from the other side, now. I want Vane trapped inside. I'm going in after him." "Mr. Callan, no! It's too dangerous. Vane is highly trained. Let us go in." "No," I insisted, already stepping into the hole, the cold, damp earth receiving me. I held my own small, concealed pistol, a piece of security hardware Finch insisted I carry. It was heavy, cold, and utterly foreign to my historian's hands.
The tunnel was narrow, pitch black and silent save for the drip of water and my own ragged breathing. I could hear Vane's footsteps ahead of me, muffled, urgent. I heard Silas's voice in my earpiece. "The tunnel is secured, Mr. Callan. Vane is locked in. He's about 20 yards ahead of you, right at the juncture point. He's realizing the trap. Be advised, he is armed. Vane had stopped. He was an archivist of human behavior, and he had just walked into a perfectly constructed trap orchestrated by the man he thought was an unstable fool. "Elias!" Vane's voice echoed down the tunnel, calm, cultured, and terrifying. "I knew the Ashworths were a trap, but I miscalculated the nature of the trap. You are not incompetent. You are calculated. Your father would be proud." I stopped, just short of the juncture. "He was betrayed by you, Vane. He wouldn't be proud of a liar and a thief." "I was not a traitor, Elias. I was a realist," Vane shot back, the sound of his voice dangerously close. "The Callans were fools. They believed knowledge should be shared with the unworthy. The lineage believes in purity, that only those of true blood and intellect can handle the power of the locus. That is why I took the key. The key of betrayal is not my failure. It is my service to a higher calling." I lowered my voice, projecting it through the damp, close air. "The Ashworths in the room behind me are obsessed with blood and lineage, Vane. They are exactly the kind of pathetic, greedy fools your lineage claims to protect. You think their blood is pure? They just sold their entire history for a lie. Your philosophy is as rotten as their foundations." Vane laughed, a sudden, sharp, cruel sound. "Their corruption is irrelevant. Their utility is what matters. They were the necessary piece of meat to bait you. And now I have you, Elias. You are unarmed, an historian in a suit. Give me the key of the vow, and I will let you live out your pathetic life with the Ashworths. Deny me, and I take the key from your corpse." I took a deep breath. He thought I was unarmed. He thought I was still just an archivist. I may be an historian, Vane, but I know what I've archived. I studied my father's notes on you. You have a fatal flaw, Vane, a code you can't break, and I know precisely where you're standing. I raised my pistol and fired a single shot, not at the sound, but at the historical weakness of the architecture. Marcus Callan's blueprints, which I had studied meticulously, showed a structural load-bearing pillar exactly 25 yards into the tunnel, the one place Vane would instinctively hide. The gunshot was deafening. It hit the support pillar. The stone groaned, then shrieked, and a cascade of centuries-old brick and earth collapsed onto Vane's position. A pain-strangled cry echoed down the tunnel. The flashlight Vane was holding tumbled through the debris and clattered to the floor, casting a dizzying, frantic light onto the mess. I moved quickly, scrambling over the newly fallen rubble. Vane was pinned, his left leg crushed beneath a massive slab of granite. His eyes, wide with shock, stared at me. His briefcase, the one containing the key of betrayal, was lying just out of his reach. I kicked the briefcase toward me and knelt beside him, my pistol pressed firmly against his temple. "The key, Vane," I commanded, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. "It's in the briefcase," he choked out, his arrogance finally broken by the sheer, blunt reality of the situation. "But you won't understand it. It's an intellectual lock, Elias, a key that only a true mind of the lineage can unlock." I ignored him, opening the briefcase. Inside, nestled in velvet, was the second key, a magnificent, intricately carved brass compass rose, ancient, heavy, and covered in obscure astronomical symbols, the perfect counterpart to the key of the vow. I pocketed the brass rose, the two keys, sacrifice and betrayal, now united in my possession. I stood up, looking down at the traitor, the man who had betrayed my parents and the entire ethos of the Obsidian Charter. "You're wrong, Vane," I said, holstering the weapon. "You believe that blood and intellect are the key. My father believed that betrayal and sacrifice are the keys to understanding history. Your key is now mine, and your lineage is one step closer to ruin." I called Silas. "Silas, Vane is neutralized. Get him out of here. He's a prisoner of the Callan Foundation now."
And Silas, make sure the Ashworths get a front row seat to his extraction. I want them to see the true price of their betrayal. I climbed out of the tunnel and into the Ashworth basement. Sterling, Eleanor, and Vivienne were still pinned against the wall by Silas's men, their eyes fixed on the tunnel. The moment they saw me emerge, covered in dust, calm and carrying the keys, their horror was absolute. Their humiliation was complete. They had sold their home, their souls, and their entire lineage for a lie, and the only thing they had received was the cold, hard reality of my power. They were not just trapped, they were witnesses to the final, fatal consequence of their own greed.
The Ashworth basement was a scene of defeated avarice and raw terror. Sterling, Eleanor, and Vivian, still pinned by Silas's men, watched with wide, horrified eyes as Vane, the ruthless killer they had eagerly let into their home, was dragged out on a stretcher, his leg crushed, his arrogance replaced by the dull shock of defeat. My final act in their miserable kingdom was a monologue of cold surgical clarity. "You have no money," I told them, my voice flat. The transfer was reversed the second Vane was in the tunnel. "You have no legal recourse. You are now accessories to a kidnapping and an attempted theft of a historical artifact under federal jurisdiction. And you have no moral ground left. You sold the last piece of your dignity, the sanctity of your home, for a lie. That is your legacy, Ashworths. Not gold, but a permanent, unerasable mark of betrayal." Eleanor broke first, her voice a desolate whisper. "What about the conservatorship, Elias? You cannot let them say I am a traitor. My reputation." "Your reputation, Eleanor, is now defined by the black wall outside your house. You will undergo your psychological evaluation. You will be found competent, but only in the petty, miserable greed that defined your lives. The conservatorship will be denied, but your punishment is far worse. You will live in this tomb, forever knowing you allowed a killer into your home, believing he would restore your status. You lost $400 million to the very man you betrayed. That is a debt you will never repay." I had the last word. I ordered Silas to release them, but to leave the tunnel entrance open, a gaping, dusty scar in their laundry room, a permanent reminder of their ultimate failure. Then, I walked out of the vault for the last time. The Ashworths were not just defeated, they were structurally and morally ruined. I returned to Blackwood Manor, the two keys, the key of the vow, sacrifice, and the key of betrayal, the brass compass rose, were now heavy in my pocket. I had Vane secured in a custom-built, soundproof chamber in the manor's deepest sublevel, guarded by Silas's entire team. Finch called, his tone triumphant. "Vane is an unparalleled capture, Elias. He will give us everything we need on the lineage. The legal battle with the Ashworths is over. The judge saw your performance at the press conference and the evidence of Vane's infiltration. The conservatorship motion has been dismissed with prejudice. You are officially the undisputed keeper of the Callan estate." I was the keeper, but I still lacked the third piece, the key of loyalty, held by the shepherd. I went back to the repository, to the star chart on the pedestal. I placed the brass compass rose onto the left latitude indentation, and the wooden key of the vow remained on the axis of time. Two pieces were now in place. The star chart still wouldn't yield the final coordinates. The right longitude was still encrypted by the third key. The key of the shepherd, loyalty, unlocks the right longitude. I stared at the chart, my historian's mind searching for the pattern, the signature of my parents' thought process. The keys were all named for moral abstractions: sacrifice, betrayal, and loyalty. The first two had been resolved through action. The last, loyalty, had to be resolved through trust. I studied Vane's captured briefcase. It was full of coded documents and a small leather-bound notebook. Inside, written in an elegant, spidery hand, was a single cryptic phrase, a historical code I recognized immediately.
The shepherd rests where the archive sleeps under the gilded dome, guarded by the forgotten name.
I recognized the reference instantly. The Gilded Dome was the nickname for the Massachusetts State House in Boston, its golden dome a landmark. The archive that slept underneath was the State Archives, a place where I, Elias Thorne, had spent countless hours researching 17th century charters. And the forgotten name? That was the test. It wouldn't be a famous name. It would be a name only a true historian, only a true archivist of the forgotten would remember. I immediately called my old department at the university, asking for the archivist. I had to become Elias Thorne one last time. "Professor Lowell," I said, my voice slipping back into my familiar academic tone, "I apologize for the intrusion. I am working on a private historical project. I need the name of the original 17th century donor of the Thorne Fund for the State Archives, the small, forgotten endowment from the early 1880s. Professor Lowell, flustered but unable to refuse the Callan Foundation, gave me the name after a brief search. The original donor was a minor landholder named Jericho Vance. Very small sum, quickly forgotten. Why the interest, Elias? Jericho Vance. I hung up the phone. The shepherd rests where the archive sleeps, guarded by the forgotten name. Vance. Juliet Vance, the key of sacrifice, had a last name that mirrored the forgotten donor. The shepherd was hidden by Juliet's own family history, a testament to loyalty that predated the Callans. The shepherd was hidden not in a safe house, but in the most public of archives, protected by a name no one would remember. I was on a private jet back to Boston within the hour. I told Finch my theory. The shepherd was likely a security guard or an archivist working under an assumed name, hiding in plain sight at the state archives. The name Vance was the necessary key. I arrived at the state archives just as they were closing. I knew the archivist on duty, a quiet, elderly man named Mr. Harrington, who always wore a slightly too big uniform. I approached him as he was locking the main door, dressed in my old, unadorned coat, the coat of Elias Thorne. "Mr. Harrington," I said, using the name I knew from the schedule. "Can I help you, sir? We're closed." I didn't argue. I looked him in the eye and delivered the full, final test, a line that Marcus Callan had taught me via his archived notes on the Charter's protocols. "The locus is open. The keeper of the unwritten history has returned. Where is the key of loyalty, shepherd?" The old man froze. His face, usually placid, snapped into a look of absolute terrified recognition. He knew the protocol. He knew the title. "Elias," he whispered, his voice cracking. He reached into his coat and produced a small velvet pouch. "I knew you would come. The Callans, they chose well. They chose the one person who knew to look at the forgotten records." He handed me the pouch. Inside was the third and final key, a smooth, heavy piece of dark jade carved in the shape of a single watchful eye. This key, Elias, is not just a locator. It is the final test. When the three keys are joined, they will open the true locus. That is not the iron casket. It is the Callan family crypt in the Blackwood grounds. The artifact is within, secured by the combined power of sacrifice, betrayal, and loyalty. You have proven you possess all three. I stared at the jade eye, the final piece of the puzzle, my parents' final testament to their love and their mission. I returned to Blackwood Manor. It was night. The air was cold, the manor was silent, and the final act was set. I went straight to the repository. The star chart was waiting. I placed the jade eye of loyalty onto the final indentation. The three keys,
The wooden vow, sacrifice. The brass compass rose, betrayal. And the jade eye, loyalty, snapped into perfect alignment. The star chart on the pedestal immediately flared with a faint, internal light. The lines of longitude and latitude now pulsed, resolving the runic symbols into a clear, precise set of coordinates. The coordinates were not a distant location. They were a set of spatial, underground references that pointed directly beneath the old, overgrown family mausoleum in the Blackwood Manor grounds, the Callan Crypt. The true locus is guarded by the dead. I called Silas and Finch. They met me at the crypt, a massive, ornate granite structure, overgrown with ivy, standing sentinel over the dense woods. The door to the crypt was solid granite, locked by a mechanism that only recognized the 3 keys together. I inserted the assembled artifact, the 3 keys, into a central opening. There was a low, subterranean grinding sound, and the massive granite door slowly swung inward, revealing a cold, descending staircase. We went down. The air was frigid and heavy. The crypt was not a place of burial, but a sterile, modern, hidden bunker. In the center, secured inside a vacuum-sealed titanium vault, was the object of the entire war. The artifact. It was not a map, not a jewel, and not a weapon. It was a single, perfectly preserved, ancient codex, a huge, leather-bound book, its pages protected by glass. The title on the spine was written in faded Latin, Veritas quae silenciorum, the truth that silenced. My God, I whispered, recognizing the reference from Vane's captured notes, the Veridian Codex, the item my parents died retrieving. I opened the glass case. The book was heavy, its leather cracked with age. I opened the first page, and my historian's eyes devoured the ancient text. It was not a religious or financial document. It was a ledger of global power. It contained the true names, real affiliations, and hidden financial networks of every major clandestine organization, including the highest echelons of the lineage. Names that belonged to world leaders, corporate giants, and members of ancient, respectable families. It was the ultimate blackmail tool, the ultimate historical record. It was the truth that silenced, the power to expose and destroy the shadows that ran the world. My parents had not left me a fortune. They had left me a war and the weapon to fight it. My role as the keeper was not to manage money, but to use this truth to preserve knowledge against those who wished to control it. I stood there, surrounded by my security team, holding the single most dangerous book in existence. I thought of the Ashworths, my former family, now trapped in their crumbling home, obsessing over their worthless lineage and their temporary lost $50 million. They had deemed me worthy only of the silence that follows a closed door. Now, I held the truth that silences the world. My past, their cruelty, and my inheritance had all been a necessary, painful education for this moment. I was Elias Callan, the last keeper of the Charter. My history had been unwritten, and now I was ready to write the next chapter of the world. The real game had just begun.